Hello everybody. I'm on my own today. Matilda is attending a course in Pretoria at the Center for Spirituality, a spiritual direction training course. And with spiritual direction so in the forefront for us at this stage around her training, we thought that it might be a good subject to discuss in our conversation today. Not only because Matilda is on the course, but on our own spiritual journey and in our own lives, it has played a very, very important role. And we want to talk a little bit more about spiritual direction today. Looking at spiritual direction, it's possible to give complicated definitions and long descriptions, but that is not what I want to do. I thought it might be best, the best route might be to tell a little bit about my own journey coming to spiritual direction and to see some of the elements already playing out in that search of mine, that journey of mine. And telling my story is not in any sense to provide a yardstick or a measurement tool, not at all. It's just conveying the things that happened in my journey that helps me, being a director myself now, also to be sensitive to certain issues. To start my story, I have to go back about 30 years to 1994, 1995. At that stage, I was a young Dutch Reformed dominee in full-time ministry, and I experienced a sense of deep longing, an emptiness, looking for more. And my problem was that I couldn't find anything to fill that void. It was a very vague feeling. I've had bouts of depression in my life. At one stage I thought maybe it might be something in that vein, but I quickly realized that wasn't exactly that. So I didn't have any frame of reference. I didn't have a vocabulary to express myself in regarding this feeling that I had. And I couldn't think of any guide, any person who could help me with that feeling that I was experiencing. So I went to my GP. I knew him well, and I described how I felt. And he confessed that he wasn't able to help me, but he knew of a good psychologist. And he referred me to this particular psychologist. I went, and within the first 10-15 minutes of our session, I realized that this wasn't what I was looking for. It wasn't as if I had a principal objection against psychologists or psychiatrists. They've helped me a lot in my life, and I've referred a lot of people to them, and I know they've helped other people. But regarding this issue, the psychologist wasn't of any help. So I left there disappointed, and with this constant sense of longing, with this void, I went through my ministry and through my life, constantly searching for, I don't know what. I didn't know what I thought, how I would know when it is the real deal, when I discover it. I was just looking for something. And then I attended a conference that the Synod held in 1996 about. And at this conference, I can't remember what the conference was about exactly, but at this conference they had a book table to the side where you could browse through theological books during tea time or over lunch. And as I was looking through the books, I came across this book by Eugene Peterson, The Contemplative Pastor, Returning to the Art of Spiritual Direction. And when I read this book, when I opened it and I started reading, it was like a homecoming. Here I found a vocabulary that expressed what I was experiencing at that stage. Here was a whole frame of reference, a system with practices that really resonated with me. So then I knew that this was the line I had to follow. This was the vein that I was looking for. Then the process started of finding my own spiritual director, because I realized that that is what I was looking for all the time and all along in my journey. So I started looking, and it took me through a lot of detours. I went down to the Cape, to the Center for Christian Spirituality there in Rosebank in the Cape. They referred me back to Auckland Park in Johannesburg, and there were quite a number of other referrals in Joburg itself. And finally, I found my spiritual director in Benoni. And we've been journeying together for close to 20 years now. And after being with her for a few years on her recommendation, I also enrolled in the advanced training in spiritual direction at the Jesuit Institute in Johannesburg, a 3-year course, and I finished that in 2008. So a long journey leading to finding my own spiritual director and also becoming a spiritual director myself. Looking back on that experience, I can see why whenever I read that passage in Mark 10, here from verse 46, why it resonates so much with me. Jesus is going through Jericho, and on his way through the town, there's a blind man sitting next to the road, Bartimaeus. He hears about Jesus going through. He calls out, asking Jesus to help him. Everybody is trying to silence him. But then Jesus stops and he says, "Bring that man to me." And Bartimaeus is brought before Jesus, and then we read in Mark 10 verse 51, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. "Teacher," the blind man answered, "I want to see again." What do you want me to do for you? I want to see. In essence, that was my longing as well. I wanted to see. I wanted to see God being active in my life. For the seeing going over into experiencing. And being on the journey now for a number of years and having read up on spiritual direction and being influenced by many sources, I can see how that seeing plays out in spiritual direction. Two quotes or principles have become very important in Matilda and my faith journey, spiritual journey. And it ties into this passage in Mark. And the first quote or principle is from the book by Eugene Peterson, where it says, God is always busy before we know it. God is always first on the scene. That's a law, it's a given, like the law of gravity. Peterson puts it so beautifully when he says, the assumption of spirituality is that always God is doing something before I know it. So the task is not to get God to do something I think needs to be done, but to become aware of what God is doing so that I can respond to it and participate and take delight in it. My task is not to take the initiative and convince God to do the things that I have in mind. My task is to discover, to see what God is doing and to respond to it and to participate in it and to rejoice in it. That's the first principle. And the second quote or principle stems from a quote by Paula Darcy, and I use that so much. It's a guiding principle in my life. Paula Darcy says, God comes to us disguised as our lives. If you want to see God, where do you have to look? Look at your life. And you can say, well, I don't have a very dramatic life. It's not very impressive. I can't really see how that can be the place or the context where God's activities play out. That's exactly where God is active. And not only is he active there, but we get to know him through the elements of our lives. There's a deep sense of holiness that is captured in this quote. God comes to us disguised as our lives. And our task is to look at the elements of our lives and see God. So looking back on my own journey, looking at the passage in Mark 10, and these two principles, these important principles, we come to the conclusion that a very, very good definition of spiritual direction, in a nutshell, it helps us to notice. It helps us to see God and to discover his activities in places where we didn't expect to see him, and in ways that we didn't expect him to act. Spiritual direction helps us to notice and to see. And where does spiritual direction play out? Often in retreat settings, either a weekend retreat, there can be sessions where you see a spiritual director, or during longer retreats, 8-day retreats. Often such retreats are silent retreats, but every day you have a session with a spiritual director where you discuss the things coming to the fore during the retreat. So that's a setting. But in general, directees, the people going for direction, they often see their spiritual director for 1 hour sessions every month. When there's a specific issue coming to the fore, the intervals can be shorter, once every 2 weeks, but in general, a session once a month, 1 hour session once a month. And one has to clarify and say that spiritual direction is not the same as psychotherapy. And looking back on my own journey, I can attest to that. The psychologist under those circumstances couldn't help me. Spiritual direction isn't the same as psychotherapy. There might be slight overlaps, and it can be that somebody is in therapy, but the spiritual direction also plays in and is more in a supportive role. But spiritual direction isn't the same as psychotherapy, where one tries to find the underlying psychological issue at play in any situation. That doesn't come to the fore in spiritual direction. And spiritual direction isn't pastoral counseling. In pastoral counseling, the focus is often on a certain crisis that has arisen, that one wants to address. You want to find a solution for that. Spiritual direction isn't so much about finding solutions, but being on a journey and being helped on that journey. And spiritual direction isn't about giving advice. The spiritual director isn't telling the directee what to do exactly. It is about helping the directee finding her or his own answers in his life where God is active. I often have this image of our lives being a storeroom that is disordered. And answers to our problems aren't carried into our lives, but has to be discovered in our lives in that disordered storeroom, almost covered with old boxes and paper and pieces of plastic. And in the spiritual direction session, helping the directee moving all this stuff away to find her own answer. Not giving the answer, but helping her or him finding their own answer in their own lives, because God is active in that life and is giving the answers in that life. Those are the answers that help us on our journeys. On a practical level, how do you find a spiritual director? You can go online. There are many sites, websites that help you in that regard. I have to confess, often South Africa isn't very well represented on those sites, but it can help you in some way. being referred to certain institutions and so on. But in general, I find that the institutions and bodies involved in the training of spiritual directors, they are very good sources to get referrals from. And I've named a few now in the conversation. Matilda is doing the course through the Center for Spirituality in Pretoria, linked to the work of the Dutch Reformed Church. There's the Center for Christian Spirituality down in the Cape, Rosebank. There's the Andrew Murray Center for Spirituality in Wellington. Often they work in close conjunction with the Center for Christian Spirituality in Cape Town. And then there's the Jesuit Institute in Johannesburg, where I did my training. All these places have large databases of the people that have done the training, so it's easy to refer you to a spiritual director in your area if there's one available. What I find in my own ministry is that I do a lot of spiritual direction through Zoom as well. So locality isn't a big stumbling block in that regard, but it helps if you get referrals from any one of those bodies or institutions. And you can also contact me or Matilda, and we can see how we can help you in that regard. But spiritual direction being such a rich resource and such a big help, and without that, our own spirituality will surely be the poorer for it. Let's become quiet at the end of this conversation, allowing whatever surfaced, whatever stirred us, touched something in us, allow that to settle and to sink in. And also hearing God saying to us, to each one of us, constantly saying that to us, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? Lord, that I may see. Amen. Keep well, everybody.